Well, speaking of legalities and being under the control of government, one of the things we've talked about on the show over the last few years is the rise of local governments and these metro districts. The Independence Institute's Justin Longo actually did a study on the number of metro districts, and there's legislation that will be introduced down at the state capitol regarding it. But before we get to the metro or to the legislation, I'm going to bring Justin Longo on the line. He's still down in Denver working, but we have him via phone. You know him from Complete Colorado, but you also need to know him as the Independence Institute's expert on metro districts, having done this paper. Justin, lay out the facts surrounding the number of metro districts that we have. And here's the other thing, too. Define metro district versus special district.
Sure, Amy. A special district is a local government that is in charge of doing generally one task, so like a cemetery district or a water district. A metro district is a sort of Frankenstein form of a special district, where the metro district doesn't do one thing, it can do a dozen things, a dozen and a half things. So a metro district is basically a special district on steroids, and it could do all the things necessary to create a development and a community.
Okay, so lay out the facts about the number of these metro districts that we have in the state of Colorado and how they have been proliferating.
Sure. Until about 1998, the growth of governments, mints as in plural, was relatively steady, but we've had an explosion since the late 90s. And so since the early 90s, population growth has been about 2% a year. However, the growth rate in governments, at least in recent times, in about the last decade or so, has been 7%. So the amount of governments being grown is well above the amount of people coming here and people being born here. So we've had this explosion in governments that most other states do not have, and it's because of the explosion in metro districts. So
why are we having this explosion? Why do we have it and other states don't?
Well, let me just give you some numbers real quick just to put it in perspective. A nice way to think about it is, instead of having a really overbearing, terrible state government like my home state of New Jersey has, we have 3,395 governments in Colorado. So we've got, instead of Soviet-style socialism, we have socialism on a very, very small scale scattered around, which it has good and bad.
I was going to say, don't we like that? Don't we like local government? Don't we want the government to be closest to us?
That's generally the principle. However, there are some pitfalls that I think Jeff's going to talk about, because the way that these local governments operate is under a very tight veil of secrecy, and it's very difficult to have any accountability with them. For example, the reason I think we've had this explosion in metro districts, and the fact is, of the 3,395 governments we have, a full 38% are metro districts, so 1,294. About 1,300 of them are metro districts. And the reason that is because developers use these metro districts to develop rather than obtaining money via the old-fashioned way of banks and convincing people that you've got a profitable project.
So this is the socialization of risk and the privatization of reward.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost the textbook definition of fascism, if you want to go to that extent. I mean, you're putting the risk on the backs of the future residents, and the way that they do that is they create a metro district, they bond out, and the bonds that they use to raise money are good for 20 years, and so they're banking on their development panning out, and use the future residents as collateral for their debt, and then the future residents pay it back. So, yeah, I mean, it's scary when it goes south. If you're one of the people that chose to move into a development and it doesn't pan out, you could be on the hook for a very large amount of money if it doesn't pan out. So it is socializing risk for sure.
Okay, let me bring in Jeffrey Hare, who is the GOP candidate for House District 48. But before you were a candidate, you were interested in metro districts. And in fact, when we did this show on metro districts, I want to say it was a couple of years ago. Justin, when did you write that paper?
Man, I think it was 2008 or 2009.
Okay, so it's been a few years, and we did that, and we've done it a couple of times since then. Jeff, you became interested in this because you are in a metro district. Explain your personal situation with metro districts.
Wow, I could spend the whole half hour talking about that. What I call my couple years of metro district hell. It was a very difficult couple of years because we were in a community or have a house in a community that has what's known as a developer district. There's multiple ways of developers incorporating these that gives them control from the very beginning and doesn't relinquish that control until the end of the development, i.e. the last lot is sold. So we, as a community, recognize this. I did a lot of research. I was the quote-unquote community organizer in our community.
Oh, that makes you a candidate. Qualifications for a candidate. Actually, you could be president.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't want that job. I just want to be a representative in House District 48 for now. So yeah, we did a lot of research on this, and I found the statutes were very developer friendly in that they left some loopholes. And there's some ethical developers that haven't taken advantage of that. There's some people that have taken advantage of poorly written statutes in some cases.
One of the things that I hear from those who defend metro districts, listen, nobody puts a gun to your head and makes you move into that. You know what you're getting into. Is that the case?
By and large, not.
Why not?
It is not the case. The transparency for metro districts is much different than it is like for a homeowners association under Kiowa. You don't have all the information coming into the closing community. You don't know, for example, what the maximum mill levy is, or you don't know what the total debt issuance is, or the unauthorized debt.
Why not?
Unissued.
It just isn't required?
It isn't required. And just in general, the metro districts are so much more complicated. There's so much more to them. I mean, you can look at a service plan as an example, which is the governing document, and not understand the whole story because there's all these intergovernmental agreements that essentially transfer authority or have different relationships with other either public entities like cities and counties or other metro districts adjacent to them.
Aren't metro districts, and I'm playing devil's advocate, aren't metro districts a good thing? Because we wouldn't have this development without a metro district.
Well, I like Justin's comment on this. It is very much socializing risk and privatizing losses or profits. And it really chooses large developers over small developers, in that only large developers have the authority to set these up or have the resources to set these up on the front end.
What do they need to set it up?
A lot of money. I mean, it in terms of organizing this, it's an expensive proposition to go through the whole process of forming a district through the county. So it's not.
Is it legal? Is it because they need to pay attorney's fees,
or
what is it that costs?
Yeah, it's legal fees in a lot of cases.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get back to your own personal experience with the metro district in which you and your family and your community is involved.
Yeah, we were in a situation where the developer got to make all the decisions.
What? What would be a decision that would make?
Based upon the funds that were coming in, how to spend the money. So in our case, they had chose to spend money more on infrastructure, dirt work, rather than putting in amenities that were promised to our community.
Oh, okay. So, right. For instance, they may have promised a park,
right? But
instead they put in
roads, water lines.
Don't you like roads and water lines, though?
Well, we like roads and water lines because they're important. But when we move into the community, we have a certain expectations of amenities. Okay. A large in our community, it was a large clubhouse overlooking Milton Reservoir, which is a nice fishing facility, that type of thing. And there was tennis courts promised and those type of things.
Is it that he didn't have enough money coming in, or he just wasn't making good on his promises?
Well, it was a little bit of both. The growth in the community hadn't justified. Well, not justified, but the growth wasn't as expected. It was one of those communities that had a flash in the pan. It didn't pan out the way they wanted. So the money, if you're a dirt developer and your goal is to sell lots and or sell the community, you have a higher incentive to make sure that you have finished lots, which are much more valuable than unfinished lots. So their economic incentive is to put the money in the dirt as opposed to
those of you who did move in and you wanted the clubhouse.
Correct.
So the developer gets to choose where that money's going to go.
Right, exactly.
So you move in thinking there's going to be a great clubhouse and some other amenities, and that part doesn't pan out.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Tell you what, we have to take a quick break. But coming back, I want to. How did this legislation that has it been introduced yet? Is it assigned a committee and it's going to be heard?
It's assigned a committee. Will be heard on Monday afternoon.
In what committee?
Local government.
Okay. I want to talk about the bill specifically and how you think it's going to address some of the issues. Also, I got to tell you, transparency in metro districts desperately needed. Desperately needed. It is difficult to find out exactly the amount of debt that Coloradans are on the hook for when it comes to these metro districts. I have a feeling it will make the levels of local debt for communities, for municipalities, counties, and school districts look like chump change. I could be wrong on that, but difficult to wrap our minds around how much it is because it's so hard to find out the information.
Absolutely.
So we'll continue our conversation with Jeffrey Hare as well as Justin Longo. We'll do that in just a moment. 10:17 the time.